condemned Saddam's move. And the endless bombings of Iraq and Kuwait continue. More than 8,000 sorties reported so far. Those raids have left extensive damage all around Baghdad, and the attacks appear to be continuing relentlessly without pause. However, an American general says Iraq's military muscle remains strong. General Burton Moore was briefing in Riyadh and said that. We're going to go down to the Pentagon for this afternoon's briefing. Jim Stewart, our man, is there.
I'm going to defer them until after we hear from General Kelly and Admiral McConnell so that we don't hold them here. They're very busy this afternoon. So I will turn the briefing over to them. They will have a, I guess, General Kelly will have a short statement for you, and then I'll follow that up with some other announcements. So again, this is Lieutenant General Tom Kelly, who's Director of Operations for the Joint Staff, and Rear Admiral Mike McConnell, who's Director of Intelligence for the Joint Staff as well. Gentlemen?
Thank you. Just a few statistical facts for you. We have more than 472,000 people in the theater now. There have been more than 81 of Operation Desert Storm. 1, 2, 3, 4. Okay. 8,100 sorties have been flown in support of the operation. During the past 24 hours, 10 Scuds have been fired at Saudi Arabia installations. 9 were shot down by Patriot missiles, and 1 Scud landed in the water and was not engaged. Just a little over an hour ago, another Scud was launched from southern Iraq, and it landed in the water short of Al Jubail. We are carrying 14 individuals missing in action, and as of now, we are carrying 9 U.S. aircraft lost, and that does not count the one that went down in Saudi Arabia due to mechanical problems. Yes, sir.
General Kelly, are you still confident that there is an element of surprise to Operation Desert Storm? Because today the Iraqi ambassador to France, or the former ambassador, said that they were anticipating a ground war, they anticipated an air raid, and some are saying now that this may be compromising the whole campaign because of this.
We think we achieved complete tactical surprise based on what their reaction was the first night. During the airstrikes in Baghdad, I learned from watching television, the lights were still on.
General, some of the Tomahawk cruise missiles that are being fired.
General, the airfield bunkers that we're hearing so much about, can you confirm that the Iraqi Air Force has put its fighter bombers into bunkers? And are we confident we know the locations of those bunkers, and can we take them out?
We know where the bunkers are. We think there are airplanes in them. Of course, we can't see inside them. We have the capability to take them out, but you got to remember with an aircraft shelter, I think that's what we call them, it's 1 bomb per, and it just takes some time to do that.
General, concerning the Tomahawk cruise missiles, we had a report in the pool information that came out that apparently 1 Tomahawk had been launched from a submarine. Apparently the first time this has been done. Can you provide some background or some reasons why this was done?
We don't discuss submarines ever. We don't discuss where sorties or missiles were launched from. We have discussed the success of the Tomahawk program, and that's all I'm going to have.
Well, is there a reason, in other words, the idea of using it, meaning showing that the system can work, gives you some additional flexibility?
Oh, we've got a lot of capability, and we're using it, but we don't discuss submarines.
General, are we sure that it is only Scuds they're launching? Are there other types of missiles they're launching as well? For example, the Hawks that supposedly the Iraqis captured from the Kuwaitis.
Of course, Hawk's a surface-to-air missile, and so it wouldn't be affecting the area where the Scuds are coming, where they're impacting. It does affect the air war, and I can't tell you right this minute whether or not they're launching Hawks.
Or any other type of...
We know of no other type missile that they have that has the capability to reach down to Bahrain, Riyadh, or the other places they've been shooting at. Yes, sir?
General, does the firing of the Scuds provide you with information which helps you then take out the launchers which have launched them? For example, these most recent 10 Scuds, have you got any announcements?
We have a very good idea of where the missiles were launched from. We react to that just as quickly as we can. I would point out to you that if they were launched from a mobile launcher, the minute the missile is off the rail, the mobile launcher is probably moving somewhere to hide. So it represents a difficult targeting dilemma, but one that we are on big time and one that we will stay on big time.
General, will you please give us the most up-to-date and best assessment of the damage that you've done to the Iraqi military? I understand you're going back to hit some targets for a second time that may not have been completely destroyed, but can you tell us which targets have been completely destroyed, what damage you've done to the Republican Guard, and what the status is of the command and control network at this time?
The short answer is no. We know we have done some damage. We've had weather problems over the past 3 days. As a matter of fact, as I looked at a picture just before I came down here, all of southern Iraq, all of Kuwait, and the northern part of Saudi Arabia are heavily covered by clouds. We've had a lot of fog problem. We are fighting the bomb damage assessment problem as hard as we can. And the minute that we get better information, and I'm authorized to release it, or someone's authorized to release it, we will. We do know that we have done damage. We can't tell completely the extent of that damage.
Well, follow up, sir. We've heard for several days that the mission, the war is proceeding pretty much as planned and that it's been largely successful. On the other hand, you're telling us you don't know what damage you've done because there's cloud cover and bad weather. How can the operation be proceeding as planned if you don't know what damage you've done? And why is a television station still on in Baghdad? Because I presume that would be a target.
First, we know what our campaign is, and we know generally what success we're having in achieving it. You're asking for very specific information on targets, which I am not prepared to give you.
Not necessarily specific.
Can I finish answering the question? We feel that we are releasing as much information as we can that is reasonable. You got to remember that we're in a war. You have to remember there's another side in this war. You have to remember that there has to be a balance between the amount of information that's released and the amount of information that we possess.
General, can we talk about weather some more?
Just put it to him.
Well, General, I'm curious as to the extent to which the weather is affecting not only the damage assessment, but the ability to conduct operations. Are we off by a third, a half, whatever? Is there some perspective you can provide on that?
Yeah, we don't have total knowledge of everything, as you know. We know that the aircraft are launching. 80% of them are successful in delivering their ordnance. We would like a little bit more time to be able to measure what the success in that deliverance has been. Some weapon systems, as you know, are not as affected by weather as other weapon systems are. But as I say, and everybody involved with the campaign has said so far, we are satisfied with the progress we're making within the parameters that we have to measure that progress right now. We expect a clearing trend to begin today, and we hope the weather's going to be better. Hope that answers your question. Yes, sir.
Yes. On weather, it seems that weather has gone from being a nuisance to more than a frustration to a serious impediment. And battle damage assessments aside, can you tell us if weather has any way impeded your battle plan? Have you had to slow down any of the operations that you anticipated would have taken place by now?
No. We knew that the weather was going to be a problem this time of the year in that area of operations. As the Secretary, I think, said this morning, we knew there'd be some clear days and there'd be some cloudy days. We hit 2 or 3 cloudy days in a row, which is limiting our ability to measure completely the effect of what we have done. But we have allocated a lot of sorties. They have flown and they have delivered their ordnance, and we think they've had an effect. We don't know exactly what that effect is yet. It has not had an impact on the conduct of the campaign so far. Yes, sir.
Given the shift in American opinion, which now believes the war could well be much longer than they earlier thought, are you now confident that a protracted ground war can be avoided?
I feel quite sure that a protracted ground war, in the sense that I think you're talking about one that takes months or years, yes, can be avoided. We are achieving success with the air campaign. Things are going about as we expected them to go, and we will not get into future operations, as you know, but I think that as they unfold, you'll see that they have been well thought out.
Given that the intelligence people seem to have got the number of Scud launchers in Iraq somewhat wrong, do you think it's possible that they have also underestimated Iraq's capacity to resist?
Well, I don't know that they've gotten the number of Scud launchers somewhat wrong. We knew they had a number of launchers before the war. We didn't know exactly how many. We don't know exactly how many missiles, but they have a lot of them. The Scud campaign is not having a dramatic effect on the conduct of this operation. As you see, the Patriots are doing a fairly good job in countering it. All he can do is sort of aim those things at a city they are absolutely not militarily significant, so I think that we can accommodate them. Yes, ma'am.
Could you, in order to follow up a little on a piece of Michael's question, talk a bit more about the damage that you've done to command and control? Have the weather problems in your assessments of the effect that you've had on that been a problem? Or can you assess, perhaps Admiral, you could speak to that, what damage you've done to the communications links and the orders that are going out and the requests that are coming back in from the Iraqi military leadership to the troops on the ground?
I would like to be totally forthcoming with you, but you're into a very delicate area in terms of security of what we have to do and process and what we'll be telling the other side. In terms of priority, I can share with you that the air superiority was the first objective, as you would expect. Command and control is very high in the list of priorities. We have inflicted damage in that. We are aware of damage. And beyond that, I'm sorry, I can't share more with you.
If you think that there's been a difficulty in terms of the communication going on, other than just saying they're inflicting damage, are people getting word from the Iraqi leadership about what to do? How to respond to what you folks are doing to them?
Well, you see their Air Force is not responding very well. You see their Army is still sitting generally in the same places they were when this began. Can't tell you exactly what the communication is between the leadership and the troops in the field, but the troops in the field aren't doing very much.
So what you're saying is the commands aren't going down.
You finished?
No, let her finish.
Well,
let her
so
finish.
you're saying the commands are not getting through.
Pardon?
So is that what you're saying, is the commands are not getting through to the troops?
We can't tell that with certitude. I'm saying that the troops aren't doing much.
Sir, 2 days
Mike,
ago...
Do you want to add to that?
I would just offer that in what we're monitoring right now, Saddam Hussein, or the command element, I can't say Saddam Hussein himself, but the command element is still in control of military activity in the country.
General, could I ask a question about the hardened sites for the Scud ballistic missiles? We're getting conflicting information. Yesterday, General Schwarzkopf suggested that those hardened fixed sites had been destroyed. Today, General Moore suggested that there may perhaps be some hardened sites still around. What is the best information on that?
We think that there's been a great deal of damage done to the fixed Scud sites. I think that's what you're talking about. They're not really hardened. We haven't seen any missiles launched from those fixed sites. Remember, the fixed sites are just a scrape in the ground with a rail, so it's possible to go out and clean out the scrape and put another rail in. That may or may not have happened. I don't know, but I think what our dilemma is, and I think Mike would agree, are the mobile launchers.
To follow on that, if I could, though, in your effort to try and get an accurate read on taking out the Scud, both the fixed and the mobile launches, how much of a problem is the use of decoys by Iraqis been trying to get an accurate read on these targets?
Somewhat of a problem. I can't quantify it. Mike, do you want to... They do use decoys and use them well.
Saddam Hussein has spent considerable years engaged in warfare, learning lessons of warfare, and what we are observing is use of decoys is one of his tactics. The General just shared with you our current view that probably have not used the fixed launchers. So it's at least my opinion that the use of decoys is high in his list of priorities, and it's been a plan throughout the lead up to this conflict.
But for going to the mobile launchers, which you're still after, does that make it very difficult then to get an accurate read on how many of the mobile launchers you really have taken out?
Well, we know with fair assurance what we've taken out. I see what you mean. Can you tell if you took out a decoy or not? I think in the case of the mobiles, yeah, we can pretty much tell what we took out.
How was that?
Well, the pilot that conducted the raid reports back, and we go by his word. I think that as they get close to him, they can differentiate between a decoy. Somebody's dropping a high bomb may not be able to. Yes, sir.
For several days you've been saying that you've had an 80% success rate. Can you tell us how you quantify that if you can't assess the damage?
Well, we can't completely assess the damage. We've had weather problems. I said we can make some assessments of the damage. What I mean with the 80% is that the sorties are launched, they go to their target, they successfully drop their ordnance, and that's what we're saying the success rate of the sortie is. Now, the bomb damage assessment is a different thing. We're still in the process of conducting that. You know, it sounds like we're just making excuses with the weather, but honest to goodness, it's there, and we're having a problem with it, and we expect it to clear up pretty soon. Yes, sir.
You said that the Army is still where it was when this war began. I assume by that you're saying there's still no indication of any pullout from Kuwait.
Or an attack, yeah.
Okay, tell us what you know about the status of both the Republican Guards in southern Iraq and the troops in Kuwait in terms of what damage has been inflicted on them and what kind of damage has been done to their supply lines.
We're working both of those things. You're right back to the basic question. We have been striking the Republican Guard pretty hard. And we have been striking their supply installations because we feel if we can cut them off, the Army can rapidly atrophy. We're not certain yet of what success we've had because that's right where the thick cloud banks are.
General,
that is not inhibiting us from making the strikes. Yes, ma'am.
Do you believe now that you said you thought only Scuds had been launched. Do you believe now the Al Hussein and the Al Abbas and the SS-12 have not been used at all? And are the Abbas and the Hussein not even operational?
Well, the Al Hussein and the Al Abbas are generically referred to as Scuds, and we think the long-range Scuds that have been launched are the Al Abbas.
Are the Al Abbas. And one other question. There are very limited ground engagements that there have been across the Kuwaiti and Iraqi border. Who do you think is giving those Iraqi ground troops their orders? Are they coming from Baghdad, or are they just local commanders?
My guess is that the local commanders were given their general strategic guidance before this all began. And so that the reaction of the troops in the field is coming from division and corps level commanders.
Are they even in touch with Baghdad at the moment?
I can't tell you.
General, with regard to the MIAs, have you launched search and rescue missions to try and find those pilots when they go down, and why haven't they been successful?
We are working the combat search and rescue as hard as we possibly can. Iraq is a fairly large country. Some of those people went down deep inside the country, and we are not going to comment on success or failure in our CSAR combat search and rescue efforts because we don't want to give them any indication of what that success might be.
Yes, question for each one of you, if we could, for both you and for the Admiral. On the Patriot question, we've been seeing, as you have, the CNN tapes and everything else that have been coming into Riyadh, coming into Tehran. Is it your impression that those missiles are getting closer, perhaps, than they should? And is there a reason why the Patriots, in theory, could not engage them at longer distances? That's for you. And then a question to the Admiral regarding command and control.
Okay, Patriot is a close-in air defense system. So it's engaging those Scuds at the ranges that it is programmed to engage them at. It is a close-in protection system. We don't have a system sitting there that can reach out. And incidentally, the flight time for the Scud, we allowed to say that, I guess? Yes, sir. It is only 7 minutes. So from the time we pick it up until the time we can react to it, 7,000 miles from the United States, incidentally, it takes a little bit of time. So I would say that the reaction of the Patriots to the Scuds has been fairly spectacular.
A fairly small optimum window, then, to actually shoot with a high degree of assurance on killing it.
Yes.
Admiral, concerning command and control, again, this gets back to what's been done in damage. If you would, could you characterize the volume of military traffic, radio and otherwise, that have been going from Baghdad to the Iraqi troops out on the Kuwaiti border before Desert Storm began as compared to after? If CNC's been disrupted, have we seen and have you detected through electronic intelligence considerable diminishment in hardline land communications and radio communications between Baghdad and the frontline troops?
I would like to answer that question for you, I truly would, but it just wouldn't be appropriate.
Is it significant?
Can you give us even the broadest indication of what proportion of the air sorties are made by planes dropping bombs and what proportion by planes doing other tasks, such as scrambling communications?
I'm not sure I fully understand. What portion of the total sorties are engaged in ground attack?
Yes.
I would have to get that. I don't have it right off the top of my head, but a good large portion. Let me not estimate. Let me get that and get it back to Mr. Williams.
Many American people are very concerned about the prisoner of war, the video as well as the audio they see. Can you confirm now, once and for all, that Iraq does hold prisoners of war, and just how many? Do you have a rough estimate? Because many people really want to know.
No, I can't, and the reason I can't is that Iraq has not yet complied with the Geneva Conventions. They're supposed to notify us when they have prisoners. I think that Secretary Cheney addressed that very well in the several interviews that he had this morning. We're still waiting for them to tell us.
The video is not enough. What they produce, the video and the audio, is not enough to confirm that the POWs are being held.
all I can do is give you the official position. It would lead one to believe, obviously, but we don't have it officially from them, and they're not complying with the Geneva Conventions. Yes, sir.
On the Iraqi combat aircraft, you say you know where the aircraft shelters are, but presumably they're fairly safely tucked away for now. Have you counted on getting more of their aircraft by now, and can you give us a rough estimate of how many you think are left?
They're, as you know, their Air Force has elected not to engage in very much combat. We would have thought, had they engaged in a lot more combat, that we would have gotten more of their aircraft. It takes time to work through the aircraft shelter dilemma because, as I said earlier, that is one precision-guided bomb per shelter, and it just takes a while to work that out. I would point out to you that we're in the 5th day. You know, if you took a week off, you'd still have 2 more days to worry about this before you came back to work. So we're in the near edge.
Are you going after aircraft in the north?
Okay. I promised I would get them back to the down to the National Military Command Center in 15 minutes, and I held them for 20. So let me say a few other things about the prisoner of war question, which is a subject of great concern to us. I want to walk you through this process just a little bit because there was a question earlier about the fact that the Iraqis had some videotape and some audio reports. Clearly, the Geneva Conventions were worked out before the era of satellite communications and worldwide radio broadcasting. And the Geneva Conventions spell out a very clear protocol for countries that are under hostilities to follow. And in fact, Iraq is a signatory to the Geneva Convention, so it knows what those provisions are. And there are certain steps which it must take to notify the United States government of the fact that it holds prisoners of war. It has not done that. So we continue to list only Americans missing in action. Now, obviously, we can't ignore the fact that family members have seen the videotape and they've heard the audio reports and they have their own conclusions to make, and we're aware of that. And so I guess you could say that 3 Americans appear to be in the custody of the Iraqi government. But we expect the government of Iraq to adhere to the conditions and terms of the 1949 Geneva Convention, to which both we and Iraq are partners. And that means that Iraq is responsible for registering any prisoners of war which it might hold, must identify them, it must notify the United States government that it holds them, and then, of course, it has certain other obligations. And those have to do with treating them fairly. If they're injured, they must get medical care. They are expected to allow inspection by the International Commission of the Red Cross, or International Committee on the Red Cross. And we have, in fact, asked the Red Cross to verify the status of all our missing people, and the Red Cross has asked to do this. So until, however, that procedure is followed, until Iraq notifies us formally that it holds American prisoners of war, we must continue to list them as missing in action. And we've seen the TV reports, we're aware of that, but we're waiting to get the formal notification. We're waiting for the Iraqis to admit the Red Cross and for that confirmation before we change their status. But let me just clarify something else. There were some questions around the Pentagon earlier today of, well, do the protections of the Geneva Convention only apply at the point at which the United States government acknowledges them as prisoners of war? Absolutely not. As soon as a country captures someone, captures a prisoner of war, they are immediately obligated to observe the terms of the Geneva Convention. So the fact that we haven't formally declared them prisoners of war is irrelevant to the question of Iraq's observing the Geneva Convention, and we would expect them to do that. And as I said before, they must assure them proper treatment, they must verify their status, they must adequately house them, they must adequately feed them, give them medical care, keep them away from the battle areas. And if, in fact, they force prisoners of war, if the Iraqis are forcing U.S. prisoners of war to make statements under duress, coercing statements out of them, that would be a violation of the Geneva Convention. If they were subjecting them to ridicule, that would be a violation. If they were abusing them in any way, mentally or physically, that would be a violation. And if, as the Iraqis claim that they will, they are going to take them to areas that are likely targets, that would also be a violation because the Geneva Convention says they have to be evacuated out of the combat zone. Now let me just say a few other things about this and then see if you have any questions about it. The State Department did take some action on this today based on the Baghdad radio reports that the government of Iraq intends to locate U.S. and other POWs in Iraq at likely strategic targets of the coalition forces. The Undersecretary of State for Political Affairs, Robert Kimmitt, called in the Iraqi chargé today to strongly protest such action and to repeat the protest that was delivered on January 20th about Iraqi treatment of U.S. and other coalition prisoners of war. Under Article 19 of the Third Geneva Convention, prisoners of war are to be evacuated as soon as possible after their capture to camps situated in an area away from the combat zone so that they will be out of danger. Under Article 23 of the Third Geneva Convention, no prisoner of war may be sent to, detained in areas where he may be exposed to the fire of the combat zone, nor may his, or one might say her presence, be used to render certain points of areas immune from military operations, and moreover, prisoners of war to have shelters against air bombardment and other hazards of war to the same extent as the local civilian population. And the State Department goes on to say that if the government of Iraq places coalition prisoners of war at military targets in Iraq, then Iraqi officials, whether members of the Iraqi armed forces or the civilian government personnel, will have violated the terms of the Geneva Convention and will, the State Department says, have committed a war crime. And a diplomatic note stating the U.S. position was presented to by the Undersecretary of State to the Iraqi chargé. But again, in terms of what we list, our list that we maintain under the very clear rules that have been worked out over the years in the Defense Department, we list 11 Americans as missing. Now, you heard General Kelly say a moment ago that there are 14 Americans missing, and the reason we list only 11 is because we haven't notified all the next of kin, and the names that we release are only after notification of the next of kin. Any questions about that?
Why do you believe that Saddam Hussein is going to abide by the Geneva Convention? Many people have always said that only the United States has historically abided by this. He's already said what he's going to do. Do you have any type of contingency plans to deal with this? The man has done all these other atrocities. Why should he comply to this?
Well, he clearly has a moral obligation to do so. He clearly has a humane obligation to do so. He clearly has a legal obligation to do so. His country is a signatory to the Geneva Convention. Iraq is a nation which conducts diplomatic exchanges with other countries. They receive visitors all the time. They're familiar with the standards for interaction between governments. And the Geneva Convention clearly compels them to treat prisoners of war properly.
Are you suggesting that there might be a war? The Iraqi news agency is reporting that they have 2 bodies of suspected American pilots and that they have 2 other prisoners that they've captured. Do you have any information to back that up?
No, that's the first I've heard of it. And again, if that is the case, it merely points up a further need for Iraq to permit members of the International Red Cross into Iraq to properly deal with prisoners of war and any other contingencies of that nature which might arise.
Has the United States notified Iraq of the Iraqi prisoners of war that have been taken?
The United States and the government of Saudi Arabia intend to comply with it fully with the terms of the Geneva Convention. I don't know exactly where the notification process stands, but the really important part here is humane treatment, no coercion, no physical or mental abuse, locating them in camps away from the combat zones, and I can absolutely guarantee the United States is complying with those provisions. Suzanne?
You know you do assessments of videos such as have been shown on the television, and you talk about the problems with the convention that Saddam's not supposed to be abusing these people. Do you have any assessment as to whether the injuries that these people appear to have had were from their injuries sustained during a crash of an airplane, or if they were in effect abused, tortured, or drugged?
There's simply no way. I understand the intent of the question, and it's something that everyone around here, of course, is very concerned about. But there's simply no way with certainty to conclude whether those individuals that Iraq says are prisoners of war have been subject to any mistreatment, whether physical mistreatment, mental mistreatment, or whatever. There's no way to know that for certain. That's another reason why we repeat the importance of allowing the International Red Cross to visit those prisoners and see for themselves that they're being adequately and fairly treated under the terms of the convention.
What's the payback then here if he doesn't follow the rules? Are we talking war crime trials, or are we talking a possible sense of resolve on the United States? What's the effect of this brutality on the airways going to have?
Well, I can't. I mean, I don't know precisely what we'll pursue. Clearly, we have the right, as I think the Secretary said this morning, to investigate, and the President has said before we would investigate any potential war crimes. We have a mechanism set up to do that. But while I understand the question, it's more than simply a matter of justice. It's also a matter of humane treatment. It's a matter of legal obligation. And it's not merely a matter of Iraq trying to keep itself out of court. It's a matter of adequately following the internationally recognized, long recognized standards of humane treatment.
Even before the war began, was the Pentagon, were Pentagon lawyers preparing a case in the event that...
Some of our CBS stations want to cut away and leave us now. For others, our coverage will continue.
United States, because as we've always said, this is a coalition effort. There are UN votes, and the United Nations has voted at least twice that I know of, notifying Iraq that it faced possible recriminations for war crimes for what it's done with Kuwait. So this is an international effort.
If the United States breaks relations with Iraq over this or other issues, would you detain or intern the remaining then former diplomats?
I don't want to speculate on what we may or may not do in the future. The point is, if they in fact hold prisoners of war now, they know what their obligations are, and we are insisting that they follow them.
What efforts are being made, if any, to possibly rescue these POWs?
I certainly wouldn't, if there were such plans, I would never speculate on them publicly, because it would merely jeopardize any possible plan.
Pete, can you characterize in any way or provide any figures as to what this is costing?
What the Operation Desert Storm is costing? No, I talked to the Pentagon Comptroller Sean O'Keefe about that. It's simply a very difficult thing to calculate. I don't think we have any very solid figures.
Any thoughts on it?
No, I have none at all. Are there any other POW questions? Because I have a few other brief announcements.
There was a report that a U.S. pilot who was shot down over Baghdad and parachuted in was later mauled and killed by an Iraqi mob. Do you have any information on that?
Never. That's the first I've heard of that. Okay, last question on this one.
Well, it's not about prisoners of war.
All right, let me make a few other announcements here then. We don't usually discuss future operations or future movements of ships, but because there's been extraordinary interest in one ship, I want to clarify its situation, and that's the aircraft carrier USS Forrestal, with Commander Carrier Group 6 and Carrier Air Wing 6 embarked. It will get underway later this week in the Jacksonville area off the Florida coast for previously scheduled training. This training will include carrier qualifications for the assigned air wing and additional fleet squadrons. The guided missile frigate USS Gallery and other Atlantic Fleet ships may also take part in this training, but the important part of what I just said is that it will get underway for previously scheduled training in the Jacksonville area, in the operating areas off the Florida coast. There have been earlier reports about what it may or may not do. I just want to clarify, in fact, what it will do.
Will it be going to the Mediterranean after its previously scheduled training?
Now we're really getting into the areas that we don't speculate on, but I want to try to steer you off of any such speculation.
Can I ask you a general question, please, before it finishes? Are there any talks or plans to consider a pause in military operation, given the confidence that's being expressed by the Allies in the United States, in order to allow for some kind of talks? Or is the decision firmly made that the military campaign will be pressed to its final conclusion, short of capitulation by Saddam Hussein?
Sure, I understand your question, but that would clearly fall into the area of future military operations, which we never discuss. One final note here, and it may seem like a small thing to you, but I guarantee you to the folks over there, men and women in the U.S. military, it's a very important thing. The President today has signed an executive order, at the request of the Secretary of Defense, which basically exempts from many provisions of the Internal Revenue Service Code the men and women that are taking part in this operation. The exact terms of the executive order we'll try to get for you here in a little while. But the order, first of all, names Iraq, Kuwait, Saudi Arabia, and other areas and waters around the combat zone as a combat zone. And that allows us then under the law to give certain benefits to the troops in terms of taxes. It gives them complete tax exemption for all military enlisted personnel. In other words, for all military income, enlisted personnel are not liable for federal taxes on that military income for the time that they're there during the designation as a combat zone. Now that's for enlisted personnel. For officers, they get a $500 a month exemption from income. And all military personnel, whether enlisted or officers, have relief from the requirements to file their income tax by April 15th. They don't have to file extensions. They don't have to do any of that sort of thing. And I realize in the times in which we live that may seem a small thing, but I assure you that it's a great relief to the people that are over there. Earlier, the department authorized imminent danger pay for these individuals, so that's just another thing that's been done for them.
Is it retroactive to August 7th, or when does it kick in?
I'm not sure about whether it's retroactive. Let me check. That's a good question. I just don't know the answer.
Does that mean the war will go on beyond April 15th?
Let me put it this way. The exemption will continue until the executive order is canceled. That's what turns it on is the executive order. What turns it off is canceling the executive order.
At the Cheney and Schwarzkopf briefing last week, there was a question about the number of tons of ordnance that had been dropped.
The Cheney and Powell briefing?
Yeah, there doesn't seem to be any information here in the Pentagon yet about...
we will press again for that. I'd forgotten that one, and we'll ask again about it. Michael?
Pete, as the top public affairs official in Pentagon, I direct this question to you. We've been trying to get assessments of the amount of damage done during this campaign, the effectiveness of the raids, and today they've been parsimonious with any information on it. Now, in the past, when a particular bombing raid or attack has gone successful, we've seen videotapes of it, and particular targets, Air Force headquarters being destroyed. These are given out to us. They're interesting. They show the effectiveness of U.S. ordnance. And yet, when you ask for a general assessment today of what we've accomplished, they say we can't discuss details, even though details have been released at your choosing to show the effectiveness of particular weapon systems. They won't discuss it in detail, even if the targets have been destroyed. They won't discuss it in general, and it's very hard to evaluate the claims that this operation is proceeding as you had planned, in the absence of any information, specific, general, whatever, about what you've accomplished. In fact, at the briefing today, your briefers seemed to walk back from what they'd said 2 days ago and when they were talking about command and control and what they're able to discuss. Can't you provide something to us about what the American military is accomplishing in its attacks on Iraq?
All right, let's talk about that for a while. First of all, let's draw a distinction between bomb damage assessment, which is basically what you're asking for, and so-called gun camera footage. There are two mutually exclusive things. Gun camera footage shows the success or failure of whether a specific bomb was dropped on a specific target. That's about all it tells you. It tells you whether the ordnance exploded properly. It gives you some very rough indication of what may have happened, but the plane is gone very quickly. What you really want to know, and that helps you, by the way, gun camera footage, which we're pursuing to release more of, by the way. But gun camera footage helps you to establish this success rate that General Kelly was talking about earlier of roughly 80% figure that he's been using of success, which he said was, you get a mission, you're a pilot, you get a mission from the Air Force or from the Navy or from the Marine Corps or from the Army, whatever your service is, to take this plane, drop this specific piece of ordnance on this specific target in this specific place. And you go out to accomplish that mission. And what they're talking about is the success rate of that. Now, maybe the planner who planned the targeting chose the right ordnance. Maybe there's enough explosive power to do the damage that the mission requires. Maybe not. Maybe one drop is enough. Maybe not. Maybe the building is tougher than they thought. Maybe not. That's where the bomb damage assessment part comes in. So I first want to draw a distinction between the gun camera footage question and bomb damage assessment. Now let's move. Okay, let me just move on to the whole thing, and then I'll be happy to take your questions. In terms of bomb damage assessment, I sense frustration here that we haven't been more forthcoming about bomb damage assessment. Let me tell you that there's frustration level all over the building about what bomb damage assessment is. As I said before, it's not like election returns. You don't just go out and do this and then the computer kicks it out the next day. It is, this sort of interpretation of this data is an art, not a science. It requires good weather, which we've had not a lot of in terms of bomb damage assessment the last few days. There is a great desire all throughout the Department of Defense, not just here in the briefing room, to have a clearer picture of bomb damage assessment. Now, as to specific targets, I think that in the coming days, let me put it that way, in the coming days, you're going to hear more about this. But we may have to go back on targets more than once. If we release sort of preliminary bomb damage assessment saying, well, on this target, X, we didn't achieve quite the success that we wanted. That's more or less a notice to the Iraqis that will come calling again. And that's a future operational detail and not the kind of thing that we can get into. I understand the frustration, and we have been trying to think of ways to better characterize it, and so far haven't successfully come up with any because of the fact that we ourselves don't have as satisfactory a picture as we want. A, and B, there are still some future operational details that we can't get into.
But Pete, just to follow up,
Sure.
But when you release footage and it shows a bomb blowing up the Air Force headquarters for the Iraqi Air Force and the building collapses.
Well, it didn't collapse, though.
Well, it didn't? So that footage you showed the other day, the building withstood all that?
Well, if you look at the picture, the building doesn't just collapse. It looks like it's under a lot of stress, but I don't think it collapsed.
I presume you may be, so you're not counting that as a destroyed target. I presume if you have enough, or when the French, I think, claim they destroyed a Scud storage center in Kuwait, or various things from the pool reports, I presume there are cases where targets are believed to be destroyed and where you're not returning to hit them again. And in those instances, you ought to be able to draw conclusions from that and make that information known if the target's destroyed.
Fair enough, and I think...
There hasn't been that.
I understand that. I think in the next few days you're going to hear more of that. I understand the frustration, and I can only tell you that we'll try to provide you as much as we can on that.
Pete, on the 80% figure? If I may, I don't want to begrudge this point, but the General Kelly said that you've established air superiority, wherever you choose in Iraq, that 80% of the ordnance dropped are successfully hitting their target, that if there is a ground war, it will not be protracted more than 2 to 3 months. He must be basing this on something that we don't know, something specific. And all we're asking is for you to share that with us.
Sure, I can walk through each one of those and explain that to you. The 80% figure is something that the pilot can tell you with fairly high degree of certainty. He has a pretty good idea, the pilot, of whether, in fact, that specific bomb was delivered on that specific target, or whether he never even pressed the button because as it came into his sights, he wasn't confident about it, or something didn't seem right, so he returned with the ordnance. Did he drop it or not? Did it land on the target? That we can tell with a fairly high degree of certainty. Second question about engagement of the Iraqi Air Force is very simple. Did they come up and shoot at you or not? Did they shoot at you from the ground or not? Again, that's something we can say with a fairly high degree of certainty. And the movement of ground forces is, again, something that we've been watching throughout the operation since the early days in early August when Iraq first invaded Kuwait. So those are the relatively easy parts to calculate.
Pete, there was no announcement today of any further destruction of mobile Scud launchers. Is it fair to claim, or fair to state then, that there have been none destroyed since last night, since the attack on Saudi?
No, I don't think that would be a fair conclusion. It's my understanding that there were, but I can't get into any more specifics than that, but I'll see if I can. Let me take some other ones, and then
a question that perhaps you could answer. Given the confusion that exists over bomb damage, which implies that you don't fully know the effectiveness.
I don't know how much confusion there is, but go ahead and finish your question. I'm sorry.
Well, whether or not there's confusion, there is confusion, I think, in some people's minds. Could you assess at this stage or characterize in any way what you consider to be now the strength of the Iraqis' capacity to resist and retaliate?
Well, they have yet to use part of their Air Force. They still retain Scuds. That still continues. That continues to be a threat. We are obviously trying to, as the days go by, foreclose the ability for the Iraqis to respond. They have chosen not to really engage us in the air yet, which is fairly self-evident. Why that is, I don't know precisely the answer. But as days go by, we continue to try to deny them the use of more and more of their military capabilities. But remember, I think it might be well to note something here, because yes, this has been going on for 5 days, and yes, information on specific damage seems to be coming out for you all, I realize, agonizingly, and in many cases for us, agonizingly slow. you have to sort of adjust your thinking on this a little bit, I think. I don't think anyone here in the Pentagon ever expected this thing to be over very quickly. I don't think anyone here expected to have instant, it's not like you, well, let me be more serious here, and not my usual style. It's not like you expected to get instant Polaroid pictures back on bomb damage assessment. The thinking here is a little more long range than what maybe some of your expectations are. We continue to work on the Scud problems. The sortie rate continues to be good, although clearly it's adjusted because of the weather. You have good days, you had bad days. We anticipated good and bad days. We've been watching the weather patterns. We know we have sunny days and cloudy days. Bomb damage assessment is a little slower than even we'd like it, but even in the best of weather circumstances, bomb damage assessment comes in a little bit slowly. So we never thought that this thing would be an instant, you do things one day, you know exactly where you stand the next day, and you go on. That's why the campaign is planned for many days. You don't just go out and do something one day, and then look at the overnights, and then go out and do something the next day. It's a multi-day process. I think the Secretary said here in the very first time he was in the briefing room that this could go on for some time. And so I understand the frustration, but I guess I'm saying, you know, you have to scale back your thinking on how quickly we would know precisely with the kind of precision that somebody would like to have where we stand.
Could you clarify a point about the 80% figure? If, as logic would suggest, the weather affects the pilot's ability to drop his bombs, wouldn't the weather also be affecting that 80% rate? How can that be constant all the way through?
Well, what you do, yeah, in a sense, but in a sense we can, sometimes we don't launch a sortie if we have expectation that it's not going to be successful. In other words, if you know a certain system has problems with clouds, and you can see that there are clouds, you just don't launch the mission.
Yeah, but
so you're confident that that 80% figure is accurate?
Well, General Kelly would know it better than I.
Well, can you go back and check that? Because in recent days have been reports that planes have been returning with ordnance.
Well, planes have been returning with ordnance since the mission started, and one of the reasons for that is that the pilots have very clear instructions on they have to have a high degree of confidence that they've engaged the target.
Maybe if you could take the question, is the 80% figure
sure.
still
I will take
the
that
current
question.
figure?
Yeah.
Pete? There had been a sortie rate, I believe, of about 2,000 a day stated, and General Kelly just said they're up to about 8,100. Given that that doesn't match the 2,000 per day, I think yesterday they said there were 7. So does that mean they've only been able to get 1,000 up? And is that due to weather?
No, I need to look into those sortie figures a little more closely. Some of them are reporting total sorties of all kinds. Some report only specific bombing runs and so forth, and we need to get those straightened out. Mark?
Pete, ever since Iraqi forces moved into southern Kuwait and dug in, this building has said that Iraqi forces are in a defensive position and able to go on the offensive on short notice. Can you still say today they're able to go on the offensive in short notice?
Well, I think in some areas, yes. Overall, they probably have a little less capacity to do that than they did before.
In what areas, in what ways?
Well, I don't want to be more specific right now.
Can I ask you if you're totally confident?
Yes, on battle damage, a lot of what we get to see is from Baghdad television, and today they showed an area which appears to be Navy civilian that had some bomb damage. Can you tell us what we were looking at and whether or not U.S. or Allied jets have hit civilian areas?
I don't know what I've not seen the pictures myself, so I couldn't say that.
Forrestal was scheduled to become a training ship. Has that changed?
I have no idea. I'll have to look into that.
Is this current training exercise they're going on battlefield battle group training, and will it last the normal length, 3 to 6 weeks?
It's the standard. I mean, I can't say exactly with precision how long it will take, but it's the standard kind of run-up training that carriers do.
Isn't it standard for a carrier to go out and do carrier quals and that sort of thing in its area before being deployed to the Med or some other faraway place?
It is standard for carriers to become qualified before they deploy, but it doesn't lock you in automatically to deploying them somewhere. And it doesn't lock you in, obviously, to deploying it to a specific place.
Can I ask you if the Pentagon is totally confident now, given that some Scuds appear to have got through the Patriot system in Saudi Arabia, one perhaps at least, that they're...
Well, no more than one.
That they're totally confident now that a further one will not hit Israel.
I think I said the other day, there is no such thing as a foolproof defensive system. So the way you phrase your question makes it impossible for me to answer it in the affirmative. But clearly the Patriots have proven themselves to be a very effective system, and it gives us one more method to try to deal with the Scud threat against Israel. It's not the only thing we're doing, but it's another one, and obviously a very highly effective one. Let me take a few more.
If you're talking about Scuds, can you give some more details about this one that General Kelly mentioned about an hour and a half ago that fell into the water, and where the Patriots were fired at it?
No, my understanding is that no Patriots were fired at it because it wasn't thought that it was going to go anywhere where it would do any damage. And I guess it was...
Where?
Sorry?
This happened where?
Well, it was fired from southern Iraq, and as I think he said, it landed in the Gulf waters near Al Jubail.
Are you trying to recover these?
I have no idea.
Pete, certainly some of the videotape footage that we're seeing from the aircraft, you certainly have pictures of of less than success and perhaps even collateral damage. How come that's not being released?
I'm sorry, I don't understand the question.
The
gun
videotape
camera
footage from the cameras from your planes. We've seen smashing successes in every case, and I'm wondering why why we're not seeing anything other than smashing successes.
Well, you know, this is ironic. Before this all started, one of your colleagues asked whether we would be showing any gun camera footage and insisted that we had to be forthcoming with gun camera footage showing hits. Okay, we've done that. Now we're being asked, all right, how come you're not showing any gun camera footage where there aren't any hits? I will look into giving you some of that footage.
Pete.
Well, Pete Williams continues the briefing at the Pentagon. We're cutting away for the moment. The question's getting fairly repetitive. The last few minutes having to do with the Pentagon's tight control on information. And make no mistake, whether one believes it's understandable or not, or one agrees with it or not, the U.S. Defense Department is keeping a tight control on the flow of information, particularly about the magnitude, the size of the operations, and the assessments of damage that the unrelenting air war are producing. The highlights of the briefing before that, including that by the military people, one Scud was launched this afternoon and is said to have landed in the water today off the coast of Saudi Arabia. That would account for an earlier alert today around the big U.S. air base at Dhahran. 9 total Allied aircraft are said to have been lost. That includes 14 missing in action aviators. Saddam Hussein is still in control of his military, say U.S. military officers. The weather continues to hamper damage assessments inside Iraq and Kuwait, and the United States believes Iraq has not yet used fixed-site Scud launchers, that it's only used the mobile Scud launchers. Now, Dateline Turkey, terrorists have thrown some sort of bomb, a pipe bomb or a firebomb, at a U.S. Army logistics facility in downtown Istanbul, Turkey. The formal name of the facility is given to us as MTMC Outport Istanbul. That's a quote. The bomb inflicted heavy damage on the building, destroyed a military truck. There are no reports of anyone being hurt. A Turkish newspaper received a call claiming responsibility on behalf of a group no one's ever heard of, the Revolutionary Left Organization. The blast happened about 1 p.m. this afternoon, Eastern Standard Time in the United States. Let's go to Scott Pelley in Dhahran about today's Scud firing that apparently landed in the water. Scott?
Dan, it was about an hour and a half ago. Saudi Arabia came under attack by Scud missile for the second night in a row. As you mentioned, this missile apparently landed in the waters of the Persian Gulf. Last night, however, 10 Scud missiles were fired on Saudi Arabia, here in Dhahran and at the Saudi capital, Riyadh. Apparently, 9 of those missiles were knocked down by U.S. Patriot missiles, according to the Pentagon, and 1 other, again, fell into the waters of the Gulf. Weather has been a tremendous problem as far as attacking the Scud missile sites. And earlier today, in a briefing here in Saudi Arabia, Major General Burton Moore told us that the United States is nowhere near its objective of attacking all of the mobile Scud launchers. As the weather continues to hamper the air campaign, U.S. armor and Allied armor rolled north toward the border with Kuwait. These are pictures of the U.S. Army 7th Corps. A large element of the U.S. Army moved here from Germany. These men and women are moving forward from their logistical supply bases to areas of attack. All men, of course, moving to the areas where they will have potential attack positions. thousands of U.S. tanks, armored personnel carriers, and artillery pieces are now being arrayed along the southern border of Kuwait for what may be the largest land battle since World War II. Dan?
Thanks, Scott. Note that the 7th Corps of the U.S. Army is a heavy armor outfit, and there are many who believe that if and when President Bush decides to make a move on land to free Kuwait from the Iraqis, that the 7th Corps would bear the brunt of whatever flanking movement there might be. But so far, let it be noted that we saw all those pictures of the equipment moving up to the front. So far, there's been some scattered and sporadic fighting along the front, about which the Defense Department says little or nothing, but no big outbreak of anything on the ground. Thus far, it continues to be mostly an air war. There's been a lot of talk about prisoners of war today. We're all concerned about those POWs inside Iraq. We've just taken in some videotape from one U.S. pilot who kept another American pilot out of Iraqi hands.
Today, we were able to bring the pilot of the F-14 back to friendly lines today.
Captain, I'm not sure whether you can talk about this, but can you tell us what happened to his navigator?
At this moment, we don't know the status of the backseater in the aircraft. For that reason, we would be very hesitant to talk about where we worked today, specifically what we were doing today, because we don't know his status.
Well, at least one pilot kept out of Iraqi hands. Dan Rather, CBS News New York. Stay tuned to this CBS station for up-to-the-minute developments in the showdown in the Gulf. We'll have complete coverage from the Middle East and around the world tonight on the CBS Evening News. Then we have a special one-hour report tonight. Special one-hour report at 10 p.m. Eastern Time. It'll be 9 p.m. in the Central Time Zone. Please note it. Special report tonight in prime time. Then later on, Charles Carroll and Leslie Stahl will have America Tonight. That'll be after your late local news. Dan Rather, CBS News for the CBS News team, and we'll keep you up to date.
Task Force Charles, this is the Division, over.
Tonight.
Roger, now.
New action in the Gulf. Allies on the offensive. And Patriots on the alert.
We trained for it, we knew exactly what we needed to do, and we did it.
Tell my wife and family that I am alive and well.
Reaction on the home front. Outrage as Iraq parades POWs.
And America is angry about this, and I think the rest of the world is.
And fear over threats to use them as human shields.
Not knowing. The not knowing is the worst part.
You're watching CBS News' continuing coverage of Showdown in the Gulf. From CBS News headquarters in New York, here is Dan Rather.
Good evening. It's dawn of day 6 in the Gulf War, and the thunder of battle continues unabated. In Saudi night air, another Iraqi Scud attack, and Allied forces continue to fly and fight. Now a total of more than 8,000 air missions, many, not all, but many of them across enemy lines. All the action against a backdrop of captured U.S. flyers, paraded before Iraqi cameras, and said to have been placed in harm's way as strategic military targets inside Iraq. It's been a day of action in the Gulf and reaction at home. Once again tonight, at least one Iraqi Scud missile destroyed in the sky over Riyadh. And like last night, American Patriot missiles and the crews backing them performed like heroes.
Yeah, I definitely have been on some highs, but last night took me quite high. It was a textbook engagement.
And more cause for celebrating. New pictures of Allied smart bomb successes. A dramatic rescue of a downed U.S. airman behind enemy lines.
As the word has it, yes, he's rather pleased to be where he is tonight.
The grim news, Saddam Hussein threatening to use Allied pilots as human shields, parading them in front of cameras.
I think our leaders and our people have wrongly attacked the peaceful people of Iraq.
Now, for the latest from the front, one of the fronts, Scott Pelley. Scott, what are you seeing and hearing there at the Dhahran Air Base in Saudi Arabia?
Dan, tonight there have been at least 2 more Iraqi missile attacks on Saudi Arabia. The first, a Scud missile launched here to Dhahran, apparently fell harmlessly into the Persian Gulf. Later, another missile was launched to the Saudi capital, Riyadh. We have videotape of U.S. Patriot missiles being launched against that attack. 2 Patriots go up at first, traveling 3 times the speed of sound and costing $1 million a copy. A third Patriot is launched before there is an impact. Tonight, there is also word of a successful human interception. A U.S. fighter pilot has been rescued behind enemy lines. The rescuers returned to base after a 9-hour mission. Captains Randy Goff and Paul Johnson discovered the downed pilot.
Just to hear the guy on the radio, to know that he was there and we could go and pick him up, it's quite a feeling to know that your mission is to go to save a life, you know, instead of to take one out.
While that pilot is safe, other U.S. flyers are battling bad weather that continues to obscure targets. It's hard for them to tell what damage they've done. It's also hard to find a Scud launcher under the clouds. Tracking the Scuds is now a priority of intelligence officers. Hidden beneath sand and camouflage, phones and computers are humming with information about the enemy.
But he fired it from basically the same area. We couldn't see it because of the fog.
This is the new nerve center for the 1st Marine Division. It is here they try to discern Saddam's next move.
If you understand his plan, then you build a plan to counter that plan. And you do it based upon the intelligence information.
At this hour, the sun is coming up here in Saudi Arabia, and it is hoped that this is the end of another night of Scud attacks. Dan?
Scott Pelley, thanks. Vietnam, Iran, Lebanon, now Iraq. It's difficult and painful for Americans to see their countrymen and allies imprisoned and exploited by an enemy. But we're showing you some of the captured airmen tonight to let you see for yourselves what they're going through and judge for yourselves their captors.
Would you tell us about your rank, name, and nationality?
My name is Guy Hunter, Jr. I am a warrant officer. I am an American.
What was your mission?
Against the Iraqi troops in southern Iraq.
What's your opinion of this aggression against Iraq?
I think this war is crazy and should never have happened. I condemn this aggression against peaceful Iraq.
My name is Lieutenant Jeffrey Norton Zahn, the United States Navy.
Your mission?
My mission was to attack H-3 airfield in southwestern Iraq.
What do you think, Lieutenant, about this aggression against Iraq?
I think our leaders and our people have wrongly attacked the peaceful people of Iraq.
Do you have a message to be sent?
Yes, I would like to tell my mother and my father and my sister that I am well treated and that they should pray for peace.
Would you tell us about your rank, name, and nationality?
My name is Flight Lieutenant Adrian John Nichol. I'm British.
What do you think of this war against Iraq?
I think this war should be stopped so we can go home. I do not agree on this war with Iraq. Mom and Dad, if you're listening, everything is okay here. Please pray for me. We should be home soon.
My name is Flight Lieutenant Peters.
Mission?
To bomb an airfield.
As for so many other people in the country, President Bush was angry at the treatment of the U.S. prisoners of war. Angry, to say the least. Wyatt Andrews is at the White House. Wyatt?
Dan, in response to those pictures, the White House reached 2 conclusions very quickly this morning. The first was to brand this as an exploitation and to brand it as a war crime. The second, perhaps as part of a psychological war campaign, is to suggest that all of this is being collected as evidence to potentially try Saddam Hussein after the war as a war criminal.
The president warned Saddam the holding of human shields would not stop the Allied pursuit of the war, and predicted from a propaganda standpoint the display of prisoners will be one more of Saddam's miscalculations.
And America is angry about this, and And so it is backfiring. If he thought this brutal treatment of pilots is a way to muster world support, he is